on the Sports Cubicle. It is Devin Tingle. It's Paul Chivari, myself, Mike Mercado. We appreciate you making us a part of your evening, and we need to get into the big game talk. We need to get into Cincinnati and LA, but before we do, the craziness that has happened with Brian Flores, who is now suing the NFL, and we have some information if you haven't been keeping up. It all started on social media when a photo image came up from Brian Flores of a text message thread he had with Bill Belichick. And long story short, Bill Belichick confirmed to him that he had gotten the job with the New York Giants until it was revealed that he hadn't interviewed yet with the Giants. Bill Belichick had made a mistake, thought he texted Brian Daboll instead of Brian Flores. That's who he got. And here we are now. And this then came out of a report where Stephen Ross offered Flores $100,000 for every game they lost to get a number one pick in the 2019 draft. And if anybody is wondering what Brian Flores is looking for in the lawsuit, is increased influence of Black individuals in hiring, increased objectivity of hiring, terminating GMs, head coaches, and coordinators, increased number of Black coordinators, incentivize hiring, retention of Black GMs, head coaches, and coordinators, transparency of pay for GMs, head coaches, and coordinators. This is almost 60 pages of the entire suit, and it is something I suggest if you're interested in these type of subject matters to check out. But I wanted to talk with the guys here on the Sports Cubicle because as a Latin man, there's a lot of stuff that kind of aggravates me here, but also is not surprising. And I think the first thing I want to talk about is the suit itself. I think for the most part, Brian Flores has decided he's never going to be a head coach in the NFL. And the fact that Bill Belichick knew ahead of time that Daboll was going to be the head coach of the Giants when they hadn't even interviewed yet Brian Flores. So the Rooney Rule, complete joke, right? A farce. It's just a cloak. And the thing that really got me was the $100,000 bid. Paulie covers a sport where teams are constantly trying to be bad to save a ton of money. There's the bottom half of the league. We see it in the Tampa Bay teams back in the day, but the Pirates, so on and so forth, right? You know the teams we're talking about, and the NBA that do it as well. But this is what annoys me is the only reason Mike Tomlin is still a head coach in the NFL is because his record is above 500. Why was Brian Flores fired from the beginning? Was it because they thought they were going to get their white hope in Jim Harbaugh? There are so many things that aggravate me, and that is the one right there. When we're talking about empowerment, we talked about it with Rocky Words, where it's the people in charge who are deciding, and we talk about boys' clubs. This is what we're speaking of. This is why people of color, this is why women talk about these things. And I know it's a subject matter for people, but it should be, because this is what's happening behind the scenes. So when you guys see this entire story, I'll start off with you, Paulie, watching the sports that you do, covering them the way you do, and you see how the trap was almost laid, where please, Tank, get Joe Burrow. Don't worry, we're going to take care of you until we fire you and hire Jim Harbaugh, and now he's got Joe Burrow. When you hear the complaints, when you see the suit, when you see everything break down, and it being the NFL, your thoughts on the whole Brian Flores situation?
Well, without knowing exactly what goes on behind closed doors, I think it's been, painfully glaring that despite the fact that the league is primarily composed of African-American players, that there's just an overall lack of African-American head coaches. So I think, the Rooney Rule was supposed to address that, but we all know that's kind of a formality. Just because you interview a minority candidate doesn't mean that minority candidate even has a chance of getting hired. I guess the hope of the Rooney Rule was at the very least is maybe these teams would learn a lot about some of these guys and at least offer them a chance of, hey, maybe it doesn't work out here, but we'd love to recommend you to anyone else. Or maybe, hey, you changed my mind today. I didn't expect to interview you, but now that I did, I kind of like you better than the guy that we had in mind. So, I don't know what they need to do to address the problem, but I think it's just really odd to me that, there's primarily white head coaches in the NFL, and I don't know what the percentage is out of the 32 teams, but I would imagine that the amount of white coaches is more than the amount of the percentage of African-American players in the league. And I'd love to see at least a little bit more balance, because I think I think African-American players want to respond to African-American coaches. And I think there's probably an incredible talent pool of guys with experience in this league that played that just never really fairly got their shot to take it to a higher level than offensive or defensive coordinator.
Dev, when you hear this story and you hear the frustration coming from Black athletes, people of color, from women, and then this all comes out, what are your thoughts?
I mean, this is one of those things. It's kind of interesting now looking back, because if we remember 2018 and 19, after the first game, there were Dolphin players saying, I want to be traded. Do you think they were kind of told, like Brian Flores, like, hey, guys, if you tank for this team, we'll do great? And there were rumors back in 2011 they were trying to tank to get Andrew Luck. It's very interesting to see, like, now looking back, like, how long have the Dolphins really been doing this? Because they've had their handful of bad seasons. They had that 1-15 year. It's like, it makes me wonder, like, were they trying to tank then? Because they've had roughly the same ownership for how many years now? It's definitely an interesting one here. And yeah, tanking's nothing new, and a lot of teams say they don't, but it's very interesting now. And Mercado, you said it best. You're like, how did Brian Flores took a team that started off like 1-8 and turn it around, lose his job this year? And I mean, Grant, I want to see him with the Chicago Bears, and I heard he had an interview with them, but it looks like they weren't going in that direction here. And my big fear for a guy like Brian Flores, especially now, is he's going to get put on the Colin Kaepernick list. Like, you did nothing wrong, but we're going to make sure you never work in the NFL while we're still around here.
We're going to be all over this with our guest of the show, Jerry Rouse. We promise it's going to be a fun episode as we preview the big game. Just really quickly as we hit this break, Stephen Ross, the owner of the Dolphins, owns, I believe, 17% of the Action Network, so a gambling site. So now you're telling somebody to tank, and you're also in with gambling, something to look out for. And we talk about subtext. We talk about little key words. How come we see offensive genius like Sean McVay all the time, right? Kyle Shanahan's, Matt LaFleur's, right? How come you don't see any black offensive geniuses? How come the only way to describe a black coach is the players relate to him or that he runs a great defense? How come Eric Bieniemy doesn't have a job? How come the only way Leftwich gets a job is by his own former team? And we haven't even seen that yet. There's a lot of things to talk about. And I'm so proud of being able to do a show with Devin Tingle and Paul Chivari to talk about these things, and our amazing audience here on the Sports Cubicle. Let us know your thoughts on Sports Cubicle TV on Twitter.